Hello and welcome to an extra episode of the World War II podcast. As many of you know, I bang on about supporting me via Patreon at the start of each episode. Those small donations help me to pay for the hosting, the software, and help me find the time to dedicate to putting the show together. So after 2 years of plugging away, I've finally reached my first funding goal on Patreon at $250 a month. Now I've reached this goal, I'm going to upgrade my hosting package, allowing me to potentially post more and longer podcasts. As a thank you to everyone for their support, and a big thank you to all those Patreons who give me $1 or $2 each month, here is an extra podcast that I've recorded. I've chatted to Craig Moore before. He runs the website tankhunter.com and contributes to tankencyclopedia.com. Craig recently took part in a dig to recover one of the very few Covenanter tanks which had been buried in Surrey in the UK. So Craig, thanks for joining me. It's perhaps not the best well known of tanks, and it comes out of the cruiser tank programme of the late 1930s. I wonder if a good starting point would be to define what was the role of the cruiser tank.
It was like cavalry. It was a fast tank. It would go up, find the enemy, shoot at them, and then move. Part of its protection was its ability to move fast and not be targeted by the enemy. But compare this with the other concept in early British armour, was the infantry tank, which was a slow-moving, heavily armoured tank that could keep pace with the infantry, like the Matilda, the Churchill. I mean, the Matilda's top speed was around about 16 miles per hour. The Coventer that came out had 31 miles an hour. It was fast. I mean, the Panzer III, that was its main enemy, only had a roughly 20 miles per hour. So this was a fast tank. This was a cavalry tank. It could find stuff. It could get out of trouble quickly. Try and go around the back of enemy positions. It was a radical change. The Soviets had the same with the BT tanks. Their fast tanks. They used the same Christie-style suspension, which enabled them to have a high top speed. It was the old British tradition of having heavy artillery and infantry, and then you had the cavalry. And from World War One, the advantage of the bumblebee effect of the light Renault FT tanks and the faster Whippet tanks that could cause havoc once a breach had been made in the enemy lines. These faster, more nimble tanks could go through in the open country and cause havoc, and that worked in the 1918, and was seen to work by the High Command. So they wanted that same sort of ability. They wanted this fast vehicle that could get round the enemy lines, and this is what the cruiser tanks were.
I mean, the programme, I think, started in 1938. What amused me while buffing up was that I didn't think it delivered much until late, but almost too late, because I think the Centurion came out of the same programme, and we're two very different tanks, because the Centurion was excellent.
Yeah, I mean, everybody says the Coventer was not a very good tank, and they've got it wrong. It was a good tank, apart from its mechanical faults in its engine. This thing was cutting-edge technology in 1939 when it was designed, and it came out just as the invasion of, just as Dunkirk finished. It was available then, so it wasn't available for the British Expeditionary Force to go over. But this tank, compared with the German tanks at that time, not later, at that time of 1940, the invasion of France, was better than the German tanks. As I said, the German Panzers were slow. The 2-pounder gun in the Coventer tank was double the range of the German 37mm gun. It could stand away and fire at the German tanks without fear of getting hit. The 2-pounder gun could knock out a Panzer III tank that at that time had quite thin armour, a kilometre away. Whereas the Panzer III, with its 37mm gun, in 1940, had to get within 500 yards of having the chance of hitting the Coventer, if it could hit it, because it was moving around fast. But that was the difference, which I didn't realise. At the time that this tank came on the scene and was available to British Army, it was a very good tank. It had sloping armour at the top to cut the weight down. It had some radical new design features. But at that time, there was no war for it to go to. And also, they was having to sort out the mechanical problems. But it wasn't the only tank that had mechanical issues at the time. The early Churchills, the Matildas, they all had, and the Crusader that was being developed at the same time. Because they were new vehicles, there were problems to be ironed out. They all had issues.
Well, drawing board to manufacture, presumably because the war started, was pretty quick. So as you say, you're going to find you have these problems to smooth out. It's not as if you've had 10 years to work on your design and perfect it.
That's right. There was an initial order for, I believe, 100, and the first 3 that came out were the test vehicles. Whilst production was going on, there's a photograph of 3 vehicles under test. Each had a different covering for the radiators at the front. The radiators are the big things that people point at and saying, oh, this is bad design. Yes, having your radiators at the front of the tank where they could get shot at easily wasn't a clever idea. But they did have great big chunks of armoured metal on the top of them to give them that protection. So this problem was visualised. The main reason was this tank wasn't as big at the back as the Crusader. They had a Meadows low-profile, horizontal opposed 12-cylinder 300 horsepower engine in the back, which gave it the low profile which they wanted, but it was wide. There was not enough room for all the cooling system that they needed in the back. So they came out with the idea of putting the hot water pipe through the side of the tank and having the radiator at the front. It's now not looked as a good idea, but that was the solution they came up with. They were trying new things. Eventually they ironed out the problems with the Mark IV version, which was continually used as a training tank for 2-3 years. It was then mechanically reliable. But it's just during this development stage, because there were no 1-year prototype stage. It was straight in manufacturer. Let's get this tank out. Let's get it visible. Let's get the troops trained on this vehicle. And if the Germans did invade in late 1940, we've got this tank that could do some damage to any invading forces.
I'm just looking at the picture of it on your website, and in the background is it's a T-34. When you mention low profile, it is remarkably low profile if compared to something like a T-34.
Yeah, and also the sloping turret. It's not vertical. It's very, very wide, so it gives you like elbow room to manoeuvre. It's not very good for people like me who's 6 foot. You've got to be quite small to work in one of these tanks.
Well, that's something I found curious. It was designed by the London, Midland and Scottish Railway Company. What is a railway company doing designing tanks?
They have the facilities. I think Nuffield and other people were looking for the ability to expand production of vehicles. If you're building a train, you know how to do heavy engineering. And the same, you're welding bits of metal together. You are producing engines. You're producing wheels. It's not too much of a difference from doing a steam engine and a railway carriage from doing sheet metal work for building a tank. And you need large spaces. When the Germans captured lots of British tanks in World War One, they commandeered I believe a Belgian railway train building facility, and they took it over, and that's where they reconditioned the Butte Panzers. The Russians, they also used some big cavernous spaces in railway factories to do repair work and also to build tanks, I believe. It's a good location to do it, although the tank that we dug up was the work was put out to English Electric, So there were a couple of different places that were building the Coventry tanks.
I guess it just shows that partly when needs must, and partly when you need to diversify your manufacturing, because you can't always rely on Vickers or whatever, because they're doing other things. They come from anywhere that can just get these things in. It's easy to forget that during the war, when it's total war, everybody is put to use irrespective of what their core product is.
Yeah, and it's the skills, it's the basic heavy engineering skills that you need to build things like tanks.
Something else that amused me as well, from about the design, the pre-war design, aluminium wheels, which is great until the war starts and you realise that aluminium's in short supply.
That's it. It's nice to have all the features you want, but then reality kicks in. You can't get. There's problems with getting rubber, problems with getting ball bearings, special glass, and things like aluminium. And then there's certain metals that is wanted elsewhere, like in the aircraft industry. They would take priority. So you've got to adapt your design, which is what they did.
It makes you wonder if planners today sit down and design these things with those logistical considerations in mind, that if the balloon goes up, we'll be short of this, so you can't put that in, but you can put this in. Centrally planning a war effort.
That's it. Yeah, I know. I mean, they are doing continuity of parts. Some of the new systems that are going in different armies, they use the basic same chassis. The Ajax, which is a bit of a Marmite system, people love it or hate it, but for the next 10, 20 years, everything's going to be based on that. So from logistic point of view, the spare parts will be easier to sort out, whether it's a armoured recovery vehicle or a gun tank version of the Ajax. So that is sensible, and they've all got the same power pack, so the power pack can come out and the power pack can come back in. David Fletcher's book on the Coventry and the Crusader point out that both vehicles shared common parts, which was quite helpful in logistics and also getting parts built in England to send out to the front, and also to send out to the training units in the UK. You're
building it up to be an excellent vehicle, other than its reliability, which is obviously quite key. But well, I was going to say, what happened? Why did it never get sent out? And we were crying out for things in the Middle East in 1940. Why were they're not sort of shipped out and just get on with it because anything will do? Well, I mean, were they really that unreliable?
They wanted a tank that would be mechanically reliable before they sent it out and sort out the engine problems. That took longer than was envisaged. Other vehicles were currently being used out in North Africa. But the problem with the Coventry is that the Germans had such a shock when they invaded France and encountered tanks like the Matilda, the Churchill, the French Char B1. They couldn't knock them out. The 37mm guns in their tanks just bounced off, and their armour was too thin. They had, although they won the campaign, they had to drastically reassess their armoured force, and they then upgraded to a 50mm gun and put extra armour, in some case spaced armour, on the front of their Panzer IIIs, and that meant the 2-pounder on the Coventry was useless. It wouldn't be able to stop these tanks, and also the armour was too thin on the Coventry, and wouldn't be able to resist shells coming from the 50mm German gun. So, although it was top of its class technology-wise for 8 months, after that, whilst it's getting the engine fixed, after that, the Germans upgraded, and this tank was no good, not fit for assessed, not fit for combat. But they built 1,771 of these, and they said, "Oh, this is a good training tank," and that's what it was used for.
So it never saw active service anywhere.
One was bombed, helping an armoured train in the UK, and 3, I believe, was sent to North Africa for trials. The only photograph we have of one of those tanks at the moment is at a repair depot, so that speaks volumes. They were never sent over there. It was also a problem of putting an upgraded 6-pounder gun into the Coventry. it just wasn't worth it. They'd already got the Crusader, they've got other tanks, the Shermans and the M3 medium tanks coming on. It was not worth the effort of trying to upgrade it. Let's make this better. Let's make it mechanically sound. That would be the Mark IV version. And let's use this as a damn good training tank in the UK.
What did the crews think of them, those crews who had to train in them?
The reports that have been dug up, there's not a lot of information, but the reports that David Fletcher dug up from the 1318th Hussars initially were great because they were in small Vickers tanks and they were upgraded to the Coventry and they thought this was wonderful. But then after using them, there was lots of moans about the unreliability of the engine and kept on stopping and starting and mechanical breakdowns. But after that, as I said, the Mark IV was a much more improved tank. It worked and didn't require the Remy mechanics to fix it as often.
Considering it never saw active service and it never really left the shores of Britain, one would have thought that there is a lot of them floating about in museums and on the historic vehicle scene, but that's not the case, is it?
No. Once they were deemed to be not fit for combat, a lot of them were either scrapped because the metal was required for more tanks, or they were put on firing ranges. And there's a great photograph of a hill in the distance with about 10 Coventers, and there's Churchills at the front just firing at these Coventers targets, these hard targets. Some of them were sent elsewhere to Australia. There are 2 survivors in Australia, but they were converted to bridge-laying tanks. And they're the only 2 survivors. The only gun tanks that we've got at the moment, although I've heard of parts being sent over to New Zealand for another one to be built in New Zealand, but that hasn't been confirmed yet, are the 2 from Denby's Vineyard in Surrey.
Now, this is incredible. So these are these been dug up. One was dug up in the 70s. How do they end up? Have they been buried? How did they end up buried in what is now a vineyard? I guess it wasn't a vineyard at the time.
No, it wasn't. Let me go back to the story of who used these. The 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, when they came over, wanted an area that they could train in and they could group up ready for D-Day. They were given Headley Court, an English stately home, which is now the medical centre for all the soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq coming back over with injuries. That was the headquarters of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division. And as the troops from Canada started to appear, they were billeted in the area, which is 20 miles southwest of London, in gorgeous countryside. It's called the North Downs. Rolling chalk hills and valleys, big farming area, lots of woods. This was the area where the Canadians were billeted, and some of them were camped. But as time went on, Nissen huts were built. So they did their training here. But this was an infantry division area, not a tank regiment area. When certain British armoured units were upgraded or they were sent elsewhere, they had their Coventry tanks were taken off them, and some were given as infantry training vehicles for learning how to work with tanks and also how to blow them up and how to stop them. That's what happened here. We only know about 2. There may be more. Coventers were given to the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division and they were sent down to Dorking. And this area between Dorking and Leatherhead up the Mole Valley is farmland. It's all grass area and it was mainly cow pasture. I spoke to a local lad at the dig. He was 8 at the time, and he said, I kept on seeing the tanks move around. I'm sure there's more of them, but every time I went to school, the tanks were in a different place. It was really good fun. So they did move. They weren't just static. We've worked out with the badges on them. The first tank, the 1971 tank, which is now fully restored at Bovington Tank Museum, that had an inverted triangle on it, a yellow triangle at the front with a bull's head, and that is the 79th Armoured Division. And that was famous for Hobart's Funnies, the flail tanks, the D-Day, the swimming tanks, the armoured vehicle recovery tanks, the assault tanks, all the funnies, the carpet laying tanks. that was what the 79th Armoured Division were given the task of developing. Obviously, they didn't really want Coventry tanks. So they got rid of them. And we believe both of these tanks are the 13th, 18th Royal Hussars tanks, and they were given to the Canadians.
So why did they bury them?
When they left, we think the Canadians buried them, but it could have been somebody else. But we think rather than there's not many scrap metal merchants in the middle of Dorking and Leatherhead, so therefore the farmer wanted to put his cows back out on the fields, so they dug a big pit in the chalk, 3 meters, 9 feet, and they put the tanks in there and they buried them. There's no ordnance in there. There's no shells, as we found out, luckily. So therefore, when they left, the farmer could then put his cows back out in the fields without fear of getting their sides all ripped up on the jagged metal.
Is there any idea how many are down there?
In this pit, we located 2. The project leader was Rick Wedlock. He's a renowned tank restorer. He's up in Manchester, and he's already restored Cromwell tanks to working condition. So this was one of his next projects, and he just loves bringing vehicles back to life. He has financed this, not contrary to some of the newspaper reports in the Times, the landowner Denby's, or the TV company History Channel that's going to do a documentary on them. Rick is financing this. It's all his equipment coming down, and it's the joy of bringing back these World War II tanks back to condition, bring them back to life. He had heard about the first tank that was dug up, and also there was rumours that there was a second tank that was reburied, and that proved to be true. The first tank was dug up by not military historians, but by a team of engineers that had come to dig up the old Victorian fort that's on the top of the hill. And the landowner, the land worker, the estate worker, told them the story about the Canadians when they were here, when they left. They dug a pit and they put 2 tanks in it. And the story goes is that they spoke to the farmer and said, "We've got the gear here. Can we dig up one of the tanks?" And he said yes. So they went down the hill. The estate worker pointed to where the hole was, and they dug it up. Bovington has been kindly sent me some photographs of the dig, and we found that the tanks were buried side by side, not in separate pits, which we initially thought. And we can see why they left the second tank, the tank that we dug up, Rick Wedlock's tank, because although the first tank, which is now at Bovington, was practically intact, the turret was there, the tracks were there, most of the tracks were there, the wheels were there. The other tank by the side had no turret, and the excavating team then, all they would have seen would have been the damaged left side. So it didn't look like there was a lot of use of bringing that tank out. They cleared the top off, they cleared one side, and because when we dug it up, we found fag packets from the 70s and bits of new tarpaulin left in there. We thought, what? Had they dug it up and put it back in? No, they left it in situ, and they just filled the chalk back in on top of it. Because what they didn't find was on the other side, which they didn't dig up, the wheels and the track was practically intact. What we worked out was we think the soldiers were learning how to stop tanks using satchel bombs. There were no holes in the back plate, which would have shown that bazookas have been used or Piats have been used. There was no splash damage of guns being fired at it on the armour plating behind the wheels. All there was the idler wheels, and the main drive wheels had been shattered, and also the road wheels had been shattered, as if someone had explosives in a bag or in a container area, put it onto the road wheels and blown up the road wheels to stop the tank. So the guys were learning their craft on how to stop enemy tanks if they came across them as infantry soldiers. Luckily for us, one of the wheels still worked, and on the damaged side, on the road wheels, and the wheels on the other side, they were practically intact. Because when we dragged it out, when Rick and his colleagues, Ian Hughes' equipment, it was easy to drag because the wheels were working. That was lovely. Ian Hughes came along with a World War II tank recovery vehicle. And so the World War II tank...
Was that Diamond Tier or a Scammer?
I'll find it in a minute. It was Corvette. It was dragged out with the winching wires. It was just so nice that a World War II tank was dragged out by a World War II recovery vehicle, which was really good.
So the turret's not there?
That turret's not there. Now, the turret you see on the photograph, 4 turrets, Coventry turrets, have been rescued some time ago from the British Rangers. And so Rick obtained that. He's also obtained a 2-pounder gun. And so these will be fixed, all genuine parts, will be fixed onto the Coventry once it's restored in the winter.
Was there anything else in it when they pulled it? I mean, what condition was the interior? Was it just completely gone?
We couldn't see it. It was full of chalk. It was literally jammed solid with chalk. On the following week, it taken until 10:30 to move the tank out at night. Rick and Ian had to go back up north. Next week, we came back down, and Ian Hughes brought a huge Vietnam War US Army super heavy forklift vehicle, and he managed to then tow the tank, down to the main building. But then when we got down there, we changed it all up, and Ian Hughes managed to turn it on its side, turn it onto the damaged wheel side, so it was vertical, and he locked it into position. And then all the volunteers, we got trowels, shovels, and was hacking at this chalk to get it to come away. And it was so exciting. We already had the excitement the week before when the diggers moved away and they called for volunteers because the first clunk of metal had been heard. It was like Time Team. And then we suddenly scraped away with the trowels, and there was the turret ring, and you knew you had got a tank. Rick Wedlock had already had that excitement a couple of months before, because he had gone with like Time Team, the magnetometer, the ground penetrating guide to try and find out the location of the tank. He'd found that, and then he'd taken a smaller digger and did a test pit, and he clunked the metal and found the driver's position. And there's a video of him going, "Yay, we got a tank!" And it's so exciting. It is like the best things that big boys can do is find tanks, and it's like finding treasure. It was quite exciting.
Well, I'm quite surprised that they're not eagerly magnetometering and metal detectoring the rest of the site to see what else is down there. It's visions of masses of armour now buried, like finding a Roman hoard of coins, but they're just tanks.
Yeah. It's a bloody big hoard. It's huge. But on the second week, when the tank was on its side, we found the engine, and a lot of it was intact. And in some of the radiator areas, there was still liquid. 76-year-old fluid was still in some of the systems. I was a little bit careful because I'm studying doing some of the World War I tanks and what happened to some of them when they were scrapped. Some of the scrapyard workers were injured because they were using torches and stuff near the old fuel boxes, and the fumes were still in there. They went bang. None of them died, but quite a few of them ended up in hospital. So a little bit conscious of that. Luckily, there was no smell of fuel or diesel. It was just the radiator fluid, the cooling system. But no, we found the engine. We found the fan. The fan was still there. When you looked inside the turret cage at the bottom was there. Although it wasn't used as a main gun tank, there was the areas for putting these shells in. They were visible. It was really thrilling to be part of that team, and thanks for Rick for letting the volunteers to come down and help him.
I wonder what happened to the turret. That's an intriguing mystery.
Yeah, that could be somewhere. We don't know.
I'm just looking at the pictures. Your problem is, I suspect, to dig any further, you're having to start pulling up vine.
Yeah, only 20 vines were hurt in this exercise. They are expensive. The deal was that Denbys would cover the expense of any vines that had to be ripped up. It is a loss of quite a lot of money to Denbys because they take ages to grow. It's a loss of production for them. Hopefully it will benefit them by lots of visitors coming down and looking for the tank and bring in extra trade for them. I think that's already done there. Every time I've gone back down there, I've been down there a couple of times, there's always people there looking at the tank, posing by the tank. Some people have actually made specific trips to come down there to see the tank. And I would recommend anybody who wants to do that to come down this summer, because it's going away at winter to be restored. It is still down there. It's on the exit of the car park. And Denbies is a wonderful place. It is such a gorgeous position in between the two chalk hills. Here's the biggest vineyard in Denbies, and you can walk all around it. There's a lovely cafeteria and shop, and I personally like the white wine, the thing called Surrey Gold.
And that's just outside Dorking, isn't it? Is it Dorking?
Yeah, between Dorking and Leatherhead.
How long do they think it's going to take to restore? I mean, I was just looking at the pictures of it. It's hard to tell how completely shot it is.
1 year, 2 years. It depends on how many bits that Rick needs to fabricate, whether he can find an engine. But the idea is that this will be a monument to the Canadian, at the moment, to the Canadian soldiers that went off to fight D-Day.
So ultimately it'll come back to the estate.
That's the plan at the moment.
That's nice. That's nice and fitting. I did sort of have visions of it going off somewhere and then being sold and then hiding away in someone's private collection to be brought out at various events. But it's quite fitting that it should stay there. So that's where it was put to rest.
The plan at the moment is that it will be come back at Denbies. Hopefully Rick will be able to drive it around a few events and stuff, and other people can go and see it, possibly at Tankfest or if it gets to that stage. But that's the plan at the moment. And what's nice from this, I've been able to contact the Canadian press and also the Canadian. They've got two tank museums, the Canadian War Museum and also the Royal Canadian Armoured Corps Museum, and give them all access to all the photographs, all the information that we've had, because it is a tank used by their troops. And they were so pleased with this. You know, it's another piece of their history coming alive as well.
It'll be interesting to see after all the publicity if anything falls out, you know, old pictures and things that people have tucked away.
That's the main reason I contacted the people over there and the press is to ask for help with researching Rick's tank, to find out, are there any photographs of the Canadian infantry in southern England? The Canadian War Museums, they haven't got it. The local Dorking History Museum, they haven't got any photographs. I know it was wartime and the censors were around, but there must be some documents or photographs of the troops' activities, the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division troops in that part of southern England. I haven't found any yet. So I put out appeals on the Canadian radio and in the press. I've got a few emails back, but I still haven't got those photographs of what it was like down there. So, I mean, if any of your listeners can help us, please, if you can contact Angus, I'm sure Angus will be able to forward any information or photographs that you've got to me, and I can then give those to Rick and also Denbies.
It certainly is a vehicle that is easy to identify. When it comes to tanks, it's a sort of a ship all of its own. That kind of
and the confusion. Yeah, that's right. And the confusion, if it's between a Crusader, which it looks very similar to, or a Covenanter, just look at the front, and on the left-hand side, the opposite side to the driver, it's got those 4 oblong planks of metal that cover the radiator, which the Crusader has not got. And this one's got 4 road wheels, whereas the Crusader has got, I believe, 5 road wheels. So that's the way of telling the difference. The radiator grills and the wheels.
One thing we've not mentioned, Covenanter. Why?
Coventa. It's such a horrible name to try and pronounce. It is a
funny one to pull out of the hat when it comes to naming.
Yeah, and also, this was the first cruiser tank to be given a name beginning with the letter C. After that, every single relatively fast tank, cruiser tank, you've got the Cromwell, Crusader, Centaur, Centurion, Challenger, Chieftain, Conqueror, Comet. They've all begin with the letter C, and that tradition has kept on up until now.
Yeah, but this is the only one that's named after a 17th century Civil War religious faction.
Yeah, who were resisting the crown. They didn't like Charles I's religious reforms, So they decided to raise an army against him.
It's such a
It's a
funny...
bit of a rebellion vehicle. It's just why choose a religious, rebellious group for a British Army tank?
I wonder if there's a civil servant somewhere at the time sniggering to himself that he got
One,
it
you can't
accepted.
pronounce it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's some in-joke with himself, this is one in the eye for the British, for the English. Or something strange along those lines.
It is a hard name to pronounce. I mean, chatting to the Canadians, it's a what tank?
You have to glance at it twice because you don't quite really take it in when you look at it. It's real funny. You think you spelt it wrong. But I think we've wandered through everything. I was just flicking through your pictures on Facebook of the dig.
We got sunburnt. I couldn't believe it. It was so hot. If you ever get a chance to do anything like this, grab the opportunity by the horns and just go. It's such a rare event in the UK. They have these in Europe when during the battles in the winter, rivers and lakes were frozen over and tanks thought they were going across the field and then suddenly they sunk. Only a month ago, I believe a Stug was brought up in Russia again. It's a common occurrence, but not in the UK. This is so rare. I mean, we've got tanks on firing ranges, and lots of the restorers are trying to gain access to these tanks and bring them off these ranges and have a chance of restoring them. But that's problematic.
Why is that problematic? I would have thought it'd be relatively, the army unwilling to give them up.
There are legal reasons. There's some of them are nature reserves, and if you drag them across the nature reserves, it's damaged so much. There are other problems as well.
Fair enough.
But some are being restored, some are being released, and there are some good restoration projects in the offing at the moment. It's just so nice that these historical vehicles are coming back to life and people can see them.
I'm just looking at the picture of your jet washing one, which actually jet washing that must have been a fantastic job because you really are revealing.
But that's controversy. It was lovely. We found the registration number and we worked out that this tank was a batch of 300 built by English Electric in the first quarter of 1941, and that tied in with the two different dates that we found on the transmission. They were moulded dates, but both of them were 1941 in spring to summer. So that tied that in lovely. But then what got us confused was we could see the red square with number 51, so we know it's a senior regiment tank. But then on the left-hand side, there was a blue shield. But the problem is that we don't know what's on the blue shield. And there are two options. One is the 27th Armoured Brigade, and that's got like a yellow seahorse on it. And then there's the 2nd Armoured Grenadiers, and they have a blue shield with a white eye, like the Eye of Sauron from Lord of the Rings on it. But then they have a red border. There's no red border showing up on this tank's shield. So at the moment, we believe it's the 13th, 18th Royal Hussars, which is the senior regiment of the 27th Armoured Brigade. And that's who we believe were the previous users of this tank before it was given to the Canadians. But that may change with further research.
Further jet washing.
Yeah, I mean, only 2 hours before you phoned me, we found a photograph of a tank that had a blue shield, no red light, red border, a Coventry tank, but it had an eye right in the middle. What the hell's that? Is that going to be an early version of the Guards badge? Is that what we've got? Have we got a Guards tank, or have we got the 2nd Armoured Brigade? We don't know yet. We're still looking into it. Things change all the time.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Rick is also after some wheels. If you know if there's any Coventry wheels around, we need 4. So if you've got any Coventry tank parts, again, please contact Angus and he'll let us know. Because, as I said, the restoration starts during the winter. This
is one of those strange things where people have something, but they don't really. It's forgotten in time what it was because somebody's died and kept it in the garage.
Yeah. And unfortunately, some of the later tanks, the Comet, the Cromwell and the Centaur, those wheels, which are a bit more numerous, they don't fit. So we want Coventry tanks wheels if you've got any, or if you know if anybody would have any, or on a range or in a shed, or if you're listening to this in Australia, please have a look at your back of your barn.
Jack up one of their tanks and pinch it.
They must have some spare parts out there, because that's where a lot of them got sent after the war. So please, any Coventry tank parts, we would be Rick would be very grateful.
Well, it is amazing how much these things get cast to the four winds at the close of the war, when we had all this surplus and we passed it off to the Dominions and any other Commonwealth country that would take it.
And also they're good sources for finding bits. If you are restoring a tank, you work out where did we sell them to, and then you go around there. So it's like one of the guys that's doing the Comet tanks in Holland. He purchased the Comet chassis that were at the Isle of Wight Museum before it closed, and he managed to locate turrets in Finland, because that's where we sent all our Comet tanks as driver training school, tanks. That's where a lot of the Comet tanks went. So of course there's spare parts, which is handy. But distinct lack of Coventry tanks spare parts at the moment, which we desperately need, or Rick needs. What I want to do is do a Facebook page later on when the restoration starts, and that'll be a place where Rick and other people can post photographs, and everybody can see how the restoration is progressing.
Well, we'll certainly work for John Phillips's Stug. He's found all kinds of bits and pieces that's turned up. Yeah,
and so we're taking a leaf out of John's book, and he's also doing it with his mate for the Marder restoration that they're doing. The Dutch guys are doing their Nashorn. They're doing that, and there's another Hummel one. There's so many good restorations going on at the moment. There's even World War I tanks being restored, or replicas being built in Belgium. I mean, it may be a long time ago, but stuff is still happening now. Stuff is still being found.
Well, there was a time when it didn't have value, because everyone knew what it was and knew what it looked like, and frankly had sat in it and driven it and didn't want to be any more part of it. And now we're maybe not rediscovering it, but we're realising that knowledge and those things are disappearing, and we have an opportunity to save it with people who actually can tell you how it works. And we're still within touching distance of it, aren't we, to find out full proper stories.
Yeah, and it's so nice finding people that were around at the time. As I said, that 8-year-old boy who confirmed the tanks were moving every day, but I couldn't pin him down to how many tanks were there. He said, "Well, I don't know, because they were moving every day. They were in different locations. I didn't count. They weren't all in one location." I'm desperate to see whether there was a troop or a squadron of tanks still use there, or is it just the two?
Well, there's $1 million question. Would it be interesting if to discover the whole field's just full of them?
Yeah, no, I don't think they'll let us dig up too many more greats.
Well, we can but dream. Thank you, Craig. You can find more information and pictures of the Covenanter tank at tank-hunter.com. And I'll post some pictures on the Facebook page, facebook.com/WW2podcast. So thanks again to all those patrons who support the show. If you would like to become a patron, go to ww2podcast.com and click on donate, or patreon.com/WW2podcast. I'm Angus Wallace, and thanks for listening.